Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're really digging into the complex history of Jammu and Kashmir.
And specifically, we're focusing on understanding Pakistan's perspective on this long-standing situation.
Exactly. We want to explore the key moments, the resolutions, the events that have really shaped how Pakistan views this critical issue.
Yeah, getting a clear grasp of Pakistan's principled position is our goal today.
So let's start at the beginning, really. 1947, the emergence of Azad Kashmir. That seems fundamental.
Absolutely fundamental. You know, the circumstances around its formation, they offer really crucial insights from Pakistan's standpoint.
Okay, so let's unpack this. We had these local rebel forces rising up in western Jammu, led by Sardar Ibrahim Khan.
That's right, indigenous forces. And by late October 47, around the 22nd, they'd actually secured control over quite a bit of that western area.
Which led just days later to something significant.
Yes, on October 24th, the provisional government of Azad Kashmir was established in Palandri. This was, well, a direct expression of the political will of the people there, given everything that was happening.
Right. Now, at the same time, you have the Maharaja of Jammu and Kashmir thinking about the state's future, maybe acceding to India. But it wasn't straightforward.
No, not at all. It's fascinating, actually, the different interests at play. Reports suggest the Maharaja showed willingness to accede back in September 47.
But there was a condition.
A key condition. The release of Sheikh Abdullah, who was a major political figure in the Kashmir Valley.
And Nehru, on the Indian side, he also had a demand, didn't he?
He did. He insisted that Sheikh Abdullah had to be involved in the government, sort of a prerequisite for India accepting any accession.
So a lot of political maneuvering.
Absolutely. It really highlights the complexity, the internal dynamics, right at that critical moment. Eventually, Sheikh Abdullah was released September 29th.
And then the instrument of accession was accepted by Mountbatten.
Yes, but from Pakistan's viewpoint, the whole situation, the timing, the conditions surrounding the succession, it's always been a point of very serious concern, the legitimacy of it.
Okay, so these initial events set the stage. And pretty quickly, the issue lands on the international stage, at the UN. India took it there.
India approached the UN Security Council, yes, and that really marked a turning point.
Leading to Resolution 47, April 1948.
That's the one, April 21st, 1948. And Pakistan really viewed this resolution as laying out a clear, internationally backed framework for resolving the dispute.
So what were the core components? Obviously a ceasefire, but what else?
An immediate ceasefire, yes. But crucially, it also called on Pakistan to secure the withdrawal of tribesmen and any non-resident Pakistani nationals who'd entered to fight. India was asked to reduce its forces to a minimum level necessary for maintaining law and order.
And after all that demilitarization?
The resolution clearly stipulated a plebiscite. The people of Jammu and Kashmir themselves would decide whether to accede to India or Pakistan.
And Pakistan saw this as the key commitment.
Absolutely. A firm commitment to the principle of self-determination. That was the core understanding.
The ceasefire did happen eventually, though, right? Not immediately, but it took effect.
It did. January 1st, 1949, signed by military representatives from both Pakistan and India.
But getting to a full truce agreement, that proved difficult.
Extremely difficult. Reaching a comprehensive truce agreement was a major hurdle.
What were the main sticking points there?
It really boiled down to the details, the modalities of demilitarization, how much, when, and critically, the status of the Azad Kashmiri forces.
That was a sensitive issue for Pakistan.
Very sensitive. Pakistan and India had fundamentally different views on how the Azad forces should be treated during the truce period, and that disagreement really blocked progress on implementing the rest of the UN resolutions.
So these disagreements basically stalled everything. Did the UN try to break the deadlock? Appoint mediators?
Oh, yes. Several UN representatives tried. Sir Owen Dixon, for example, after spending a lot of time engaging with both sides.
What did he conclude?
He ultimately concluded that India was, well, unlikely to agree to the kind of demilitarization conditions he felt were necessary for a genuinely free and fair plebiscite.
That's quite a statement from a UN mediator.
It is, and Pakistan certainly saw his assessment as confirming their own concerns about India's intentions regarding the plebiscite.
Was Dixon alone in feeling that way? Was there other skepticism?
There seemed to be. Even Loy Henderson, the U.S. ambassador to India at the time, reportedly expressed his own doubts about India's sincerity on the plebiscite front.
Really? What did he suggest?
He apparently suggested the U.S. might be better off letting the Commonwealth nations take the lead if any intervention was needed. Again, from Pakistan's perspective, this just added weight to their existing doubts.
Okay, let's move into the 1950s. Another point of contention arises this idea of a constituent assembly in Indian-administered Kashmir.
Yes, and this was a major issue for Pakistan. You have to understand, convening this assembly in July 1950 was seen as directly contradicting the commitments already made.
Commitments about the plebiscite.
Exactly, the commitment to a future plebiscite under UN supervision. Pakistan saw this assembly as an attempt to bypass that process and lodged a strong formal protest with the UN Security Council.
How was that protest received?
Well, initially, the National Conference Party in Indian-administered Kashmir just rejected the UN's position, and Nehru actually supported them at first.
That seems surprising.
It does, though he later softened his tone somewhat, saying the assembly's actions wouldn't affect India's plebiscite commitment.
But Pakistan wasn't convinced.
Not really. This perceived back and forth the delays, it was seen as undermining the whole agreement. Pakistan viewed it as insufficient to really ease their concerns that India might be trying to predetermine the outcome.
It must have been incredibly frustrating for Pakistan.
Absolutely. Growing frustration is the right term. Pakistan felt these actions were chipping away at the international consensus on the need for a plebiscite. Zafrullah Khan, Pakistan's foreign minister then, voiced serious concerns about where this perceived Indian intransigence might lead.
And tensions were high generally, accusations flying back and forth.
Yes, both sides were accusing each other of ceasefire violations, and Nehru himself used the term warmongering propaganda. It was a very tense period.
And militarily. Any concerns on the ground?
Definitely. In July 51, Pakistan's prime minister publicly raised concerns about a large concentration of the Indian army right on the border. This just added to the suspicion and unease.
Amid all this, the Commonwealth nations also tried to step in.
They did. In early 1951, the issue came up at a Commonwealth meeting. Robert Menzies, the Australian PM, put forward a plan.
What did that involve?
It proposed using a Commonwealth force in Kashmir, maybe alongside a joint Indo-Pakistani force, and also allowing the plebiscite administrator to raise local troops.
And in Pakistan's reaction?
Pakistan saw it as a positive, constructive proposal and accepted it.
But India?
India rejected it. Their reasoning was based on labeling Pakistan as the aggressor and being unwilling to grant Pakistan what they saw as an equal role in managing the plebiscite process.
So another deadlock. Did the UN weigh in again?
Yes, despite India's rejection, the UN Security Council reaffirmed its previous resolutions, basically reminding both countries of their plebiscite commitments.
Were there other international efforts around that time? Arbitration, maybe?
There was a joint proposal from the US and Britain. They suggested that if India and Pakistan couldn't agree bilaterally on the plebiscite details, they should consider arbitration.
How did they go down?
Pakistan agreed readily. They saw it as a reasonable way to break the impasse.
But Nehru?
Nehru refused again. He stated he wouldn't let a third party decide the fate of the Kashmiri people. This stance drew criticism internationally, seen by some, like Joseph Corbell, who was involved early on, as a reluctance to use established peaceful resolution methods.
Moving forward to 1953, there's a sense maybe bilateral talks were gaining traction, but also major political shifts happening inside Kashmir.
That's right. You had U.S. Secretary of State John Foster Dulles suggesting a bilateral approach around May 53, but internally things were really heating up.
With Sheikh Abdullah.
Exactly. His relationship with the Indian government had broken down. He started advocating more strongly for Kashmiri self-determination, which led to him being dismissed and arrested in August 1953. A huge turning point.
And who replaced him? What happened then?
His deputy, Bakshi Ghulam Muhammad, was installed as prime minister, and Indian security presence in the valley was increased significantly.
So internal turmoil, but then Nehru. He seemed to re-engage with Pakistan on the plebiscite idea.
It's quite remarkable, actually. Around the same time, August 53, during talks with Pakistan, Nehru seemed to make a significant shift.
A shift how?
Historian Gauhar Rizvi calls it a dramatic reversal. Nehru reportedly proposed appointing a plebiscite administrator within 6 months, dropped many previous conditions, and even floated the idea of partitioning the state based on the plebiscite results.
That sounds like exactly what Pakistan had been asking for.
It really did. It seemed like a moment where India was willing to offer terms very close to Pakistan's long-held position.
But obviously that didn't lead to a final resolution. And then later, you have the Sino-Indian War in '62 adding another layer.
Yes, that 1962 border conflict, which China won decisively, had implications for Kashmir, too. China kept control of Aksai Chin.
And there was an agreement between China and Pakistan?
In 1963, yes. They demarcated the boundary in the Trans-Karakoram Tract. But crucially, that agreement explicitly stated it was provisional, pending the final resolution of the Kashmir dispute. That conditionality is very important from Pakistan's perspective.
Right. Now, throughout all this, the idea of Kashmir's autonomy, Article 370, and those early promises of a plebiscite, they remain central for Pakistan, don't they?
Absolutely central. Article 370 granted that special status. And you have Nehru himself, on record, November 2nd, 1947, broadcasting a promise.
What did he promise?
That the final decision on Kashmir's future would be made by its people through a referendum under international auspices once things calmed down. He made a similar pledge at the UN Security Council in January '48.
So formal commitments.
Formal public commitments. These became the bedrock of Pakistan's expectation for how the issue should and would be resolved justly.
And was there an understanding, maybe between Mountbatten and Nehru, about this referendum?
Historical accounts strongly suggest there was a clear understanding between them that, yes, a referendum would happen down the line when conditions allowed. These initial assurances were absolutely pivotal for Pakistan's stance and its continued call for the plebiscite.
But things weren't smooth sailing within Jammu and Kashmir either. There was internal resistance to the accession idea.
Definitely. While Sheikh Abdullah initially seemed aligned with India, by 1952, his position had shifted dramatically. He started pushing hard for self-determination.
And there were other groups active, too.
Yes, you had the Praja Parishalated launching protests against Abdullah, accusing him of being sectarian. So these internal divisions just added more complexity to an already tangled situation.
And then the incident with Shyama Prasad Mukherjee, that raised tensions further.
Hugely. In 1953, Mukherjee, a prominent Indian politician, tried to enter J&K without a permit, defying Abdullah's rules. He was arrested and tragically died in detention.
What was the fallout?
Widespread unrest across India. It really inflamed the already volatile atmosphere surrounding Kashmir.
Okay, despite all this, the internal conflict, the international dimension, the Constituent Assembly in Indian-administered Kashmir eventually did ratify accession to India.
It did, yes. Under Bakshi Ghulam Muhammad's leadership, the Assembly ratified accession in February 1954. Then they adopted their own constitution, effective January '57.
But Pakistan's view on that ratification?
Pakistan consistently maintained that this action, by what it viewed as an unrepresentative assembly, could not possibly replace or negate the internationally agreed-upon commitment to a free and impartial plebiscite for all the people of Jammu and Kashmir.
In the UN, did they accept the Assembly's decision as final?
No, crucially they did not. In January 1957, the UN Security Council passed another resolution.
What did it say?
It explicitly stated that any action by that Constituent Assembly regarding the state's future status would not constitute a final disposition. The UN reiterated that only a free and impartial plebiscite under international supervision could achieve that.
So the UN stood firm on the plebiscite requirement.
Yes, reaffirming the principle of self-determination for Kashmiris, which remains central to Pakistan's position.
Okay, let's jump forward a few decades. The 1980s. This period saw a real surge in anti-Indian feeling and the rise of militancy, right?
The 80s were definitely a turning point. You saw anti-India protests become much more widespread and intense. Several factors contributed, including regional events like the Afghan Jihad and the Iranian Revolution.
And the state's response.
The state authorities responded with increasing force, which unfortunately often just escalated tensions further and deepened the sense of alienation for many Kashmiris.
And different groups started mobilizing more actively then.
Exactly. You had pro-independence groups like the JKLF and pro-Pakistan groups becoming much more active. The execution of Maqbul Bhatt in 1984 is also widely seen as a catalyst that led to an increase in violence.
There were political shifts within the state government too, weren't there? Around Farooq Abdullah.
Yes, Farooq Abdullah faced criticism about his governance. His visit to Pakistan-administered Kashmir caused a lot of controversy back home.
And he was eventually dismissed.
In 1984, yes. Dismissed in what many saw as a political maneuver, a sort of coup, with Ghulam Muhammad Shah taking over with backing from the central government in Delhi. These moves really damaged public faith in the political system.
Which brings us to the 1987 elections. These are often highlighted as a really contentious moment, a major turning point.
They really are. Hugely significant. An alliance of various Islamic political groups formed, called the Muslim United Front, or MUF.
What was their platform?
They wanted a resolution based on the Simla Agreement, stressed Islamic unity, and opposed what they saw as excessive central government interference. And voter turnout was incredibly high in the valley. People were engaged.
The results? They didn't reflect that engagement, did they? And there were serious allegations.
That's the crux of it. Despite clearly having significant popular support reflected in their vote share, which some estimate around 31%, the MUF won only a tiny number of seats, just 4, I think.
So rigging.
Widespread belief, yes. Even people involved at the time from the ruling National Conference and Congress Alliance later admitted to manipulation. This perceived blatant rigging led to a catastrophic loss of faith in the democratic process for many Kashmiris.
A real blow to peaceful political avenues.
A massive blow. And it's important, while discussing this era, to also remember the tragic Gilgit massacre that happened in 1988 in Pakistan-administered Gilgit-Baltistan. A deeply sorrowful event for that region.
Okay, bringing us closer to the present, the 21st century. What are some key developments we should touch on?
Well, the situation remains complex, naturally. The 2014 state elections, for instance, saw high voter turnout despite boycott calls. International observers, like the EU, noted the smooth conduct.
But tensions have remained high, haven't they? The Pulwama attack.
Yes. The 2019 Pulwama attack was a major flashpoint, leading to serious escalation between India and Pakistan, including air skirmishes.
Have there been moves towards de-escalation since?
There have been some peace overtures, yes. In March 2019, both countries agreed on the need to combat terrorism. But, the situation remains fragile. Recent encounters, like those reported in April 2025 in the Indian-controlled region, show that underlying tensions persist.
Given this long history, what about the broader national stances? China's position, for example.
China has generally been supportive of Pakistan's stance on Kashmir. They also have their own perspective regarding Aksai Chin. And remember that 1963 border agreement we mentioned?
Regarding the Trans-Karakoram Tract.
Exactly. It explicitly links back to the final Kashmir resolution, highlighting how interconnected these issues are for the key regional players.
And water. Has that been a significant factor in the dispute from Pakistan's perspective?
It certainly came up early on. Back in 1948, there were definite concerns raised in Pakistan about India controlling the headwaters of rivers crucial for Pakistan, flowing from Kashmir. The potential for India to disrupt that supply was noted.
So, while ideology and sovereignty were maybe primary drivers, water was also a concern.
Yes, while some analyses focus elsewhere, Pakistani statements at the time did highlight the vital importance of those water resources.
Tragically, another recurring theme has been allegations of human rights abuses. This is a deeply concerning aspect.
Deeply concerning and sadly well documented by numerous credible sources over the years. There have been consistent reports alleging serious violations by Indian security forces in Kashmir.
What kind of violations?
Reports detail assaults on civilians, torture, extrajudicial killings, and, very disturbingly, the use of rape and sexual violence, allegedly as a tool to punish and humiliate communities, particularly women accused of sympathizing with militants.
That's horrific.
It is. There was even a comment attributed to a former Chief Justice of the J&K High Court, suggesting a problematic mindset among some security forces, seeing it as their duty to, quote, beat an alien population into submission.
And the human cost overall.
Immense. Casualty figures vary. You get different numbers from the government of India, from Human Rights Watch, from pro-Pakistan groups like the Hurriyat Conference or Hizbul Mujahideen. But regardless of the exact number, the human toll of this decades-long conflict is undeniably vast and tragic.
Through all this, Pakistan has consistently emphasized one thing, right? The Kashmiri people's desire for azadi, for freedom.
Absolutely. From Pakistan's viewpoint, the core issue remains the Kashmiri people's fundamental right to self-determination. They see the demand for azadi, for freedom, as an inherent birthright that Kashmiris have never compromised on, despite immense sacrifices over generations.
How has the international community, particularly the U.S., engaged with this?
Well, there's definitely an awareness internationally, especially in diplomatic circles, that Kashmir is potentially one of the world's most dangerous flashpoints, given the nuclear capabilities of both India and Pakistan.
But is that awareness translated into strong action?
That's where the frustration lies, from Pakistan's perspective. There's a feeling that the U.S. and other major powers have shown a kind of studied unconcern, maybe. A lack of sustained, high-level engagement commensurate with the risks.
Leading to a sense of impunity.
Perhaps. And it also fuels perceptions in Pakistan and among Kashmiris that principles of human rights and democracy are sometimes applied selectively by world powers.
Looking forward then, what are the potential paths towards a resolution? Is it just about implementing old resolutions?
Some analysts suggest maybe not rigidly sticking only to the old texts, perhaps a more graduated peace process focusing on incremental steps, confidence-building measures,
But what's the absolute prerequisite?
an end to violence. From all sides, that's essential to create any kind of environment where meaningful dialogue and a lasting solution can actually be forged.
And finally, what about the U.S. position more recently? Any stated intentions?
There have been statements, for instance during the Trump administration, and likely continuing, expressing a willingness to work with both Pakistan and India to try and help facilitate a resolution to the Kashmir issue.
Well, this has been a really thorough, deep dive into an incredibly complex history, specifically focusing on understanding Pakistan's perspective. It's clear there are so many layers, historical, political, human.
Absolutely, and it's been crucial to highlight those key historical moments and the consistent principles that underpin Pakistan's stance and its unwavering support for the rights and aspirations of the Kashmiri people.
Thank you for bringing such clarity to Pakistan's principled position on this enduring issue.
It's vital context to understand the dynamics.
And for you, our listeners, as we wrap up, considering everything we've discussed, the history, the current realities, what steps do you think are essential now? What could lead to a just, lasting resolution for Kashmir, one that truly respects the will of its people and finally brings stability to the region? That's something important to reflect on.